And now I would like to invite our second speaker for today, Stephan Schneider. And Stefan Schneider is going to talk today about ramp up your GraphQL learning experience with data you already have. In case you don't know Stefan is a backend developer at Contentful since 2018. GraphQL is not just an interesting technology for him. When he started participating in the company's initial development of their first GraphQL API. And he has not stepped back since, and he constantly plays with new ways to integrate pre-existing data with GraphQL. So without any further delay, I bring you to the stage. Stefan.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Hi, Stefan.
So let me get my screen share in here. That should be visible now, right? Cool.
Great.
So yeah, let me get my speaker notes up here as well. So sad that I won't be seeing all of you then. Okay, cool. Yeah, so this talk is, the title already says, is about how you can use the data you already have, meaning some data from like maybe some pet project or even like from your company or whatever that is already existing, and you like want to expose it with GraphQL because seldomly you like really create like a new project with like a completely new data set, or if you do, it happens to be like quite overwhelming. And so the first thing is like how do I actually get to that point here? So in the beginning, I was working with GraphQL, just like like reading an example tutorial here and there, but then eventually went like with the company for GraphQL, and there we had like different things that we actually needed to try out and needed to do, and I'm like to like apply technologies with like specific questions in mind or like problems that I have, and so just doing like something else, like a small starter, and just like learning how to query the data with it was just not sufficient for me. So why do we don't actually want a starter here? It's like, yeah, starter is a great way to show like a specific way of implementing something, and like to scaffold stuff. Like you want to wire up a Gatsby project, you have some content provider, some styling, some default functionality that like tracking or so that you want to combine together. And there it's like really good to have like a starter that gives you something. But if you really want to understand the technology and want to reuse it afterwards and really master it, I don't think that this is really giving you much. And so I was like then being asked by Stefan Judas at some point, like a developer relations person from Contentful, who's also very active in the community. Maybe some of you know him, and he was like reaching out and asking, "Hey, you're like doing so much with GraphQL. What are actually the tutorials that you like?" And I didn't have an answer to that, like really not, because I was never really following it. And I was like, why don't I actually encourage more people to try it out with your own data? And that's what I'm here for today. So I want to encourage you to try it out with data you have to like prove to your project or your company that GraphQL is a good option to choose here. And therefore, we're not using a starter because that just shows that a project works, like GraphQL itself works. And it's more about like you querying the data. And we are going to show you how we can do that for your use case so that you can actually get going and understand the underlying functionality. So you could argue, well, I can do the same thing with just like to-do MVC or a simple block example. I can still build that from my ground up, and yeah, you can do. It's not specifically thrilling, if you ask me. I don't really get my dopamine out of it. If something works, it's not really, my brain doesn't really know what it was expecting for you to see when you get the first time results, because it's not your data set. If you have something you're very much in love with, or you at least know the data shape, then you see some data and you know directly or immediately like whether that's what you were expecting or not. So like the feedback loop for your brain is also a bit better. Also, like to do MVC, yeah, you can compare it quite good with other implementation. So if you are there for like, I want to show off a new project like Helix or Nexus or whatever, and I want to show that it works or how it works, then to do MVC is a great thing. You can just jump in there and you have a specific feature set you can replicate, and then you can compare it. And I think that's the difference here. Like if you're just doing it for yourself, like some kind of like intrinsic motivation, you want to prove to yourself that something would work with GraphQL for your use case. Then you're doing it like for yourself, and only you need to work with it or understand it. Maybe some people from the company want to pitch it to. So it's like more intrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation would be for me here. You want to like showcase it. You want to put it into a blog article. Everyone should read, no matter whether they know your data domain or not. Then like having something very easy to understand, like a to-do MVC or blog, is like a very good and cool thing. So it's not like, you know, fighting for like doing it either way. It's just like what you want to achieve with it. So pitfalls, because we all like to know about pitfalls up front, right? And usually projects tend to go into two different directions. Either they generate no code for you at all. I will show you that in a second. And to me, I then struggle to understand what is actually going on in the background. And you don't really see the schema, or you don't learn too much from it. Or you just like generate it for all the data you have, depending on what kind of data source you take. That can be a lot of code that gets generated. And initially, you don't really understand what it's doing, and you might not want to have that. Because you then need to touch all of them to just get your if you need to adjust it. So for me, that's like also very overwhelming. Then you just have like, okay, it just generated me dozens of things. What is it actually doing? And then also you might have like some incompatibilities. Let's say you use some character that is not allowed for a GraphQL type name, and the tool doesn't catch it properly, also then probably the whole graph generation will just fail if you want to use it as a schema. And there's usually not a partial generation you can do. So what can be those kind of things where you need to do that is, 1 second. So for example, if you say you have a database already, and on the database, you have like all the data already. So you're generating it from that database, you're getting the code generated, and then you look at it and see like, okay, maybe it fails because there's like an ID field missing or so. We, on our project that I will show you later, have an artist type or an artist object, which has no ID field. It only has like a slug, because the slug is unique to it. So we didn't see we needed to use an ascending integer. But some tools might expect that, and then you actually need to work around that. We will get some tips around how we can do that later. And then the same as Tomek just mentioned, like naming conventions, they might just not match. We will see that on the example with Prisma later on, where I was using like a snake-cased, how's it called, like table naming in a database, which didn't work out without some mapping. It will work eventually. So what I will be demoing right now is Clubnacht. Clubnacht is a project I'm building with two friends, or have been building with two friends, which is literally just like a timetable app for a club. And some of you might recognize it. Yeah. So that's like from pre-COVID area, obviously, because nowadays we wouldn't need to go there. But if you go on some event, you get here like who is playing, and you can actually do that retroactively, so that you can see it here, and then you can click on people, see when they have played, and so on. So it's also rather simple from the data shape, and we have been building that, and we have a database for it, but we are only doing that on some REST-ish API by now, because it has been a while since we have been working on that the last time. What I want to use for that is Hasura. Some of you might have heard, just like for showing what they are doing radically different than all the others, and whether that's actually good for a learning experience. So let me get terminal window up here. I can, first I actually wanted to show here. Is that visible? I can make it better. Cool. So this here, for example, is the artist table from what I've just showed you in the system, which is rather simple. Here I cannot zoom in. Oh, I can. It's rather simple, and here I added the ID actually already. And you have like a name, a slug, whether it is like a resident, which is like some kind of special thing for an artist to be in a club. If you're a resident, you're basically one of the cool guys there. And you can see this is like lowercase here, and on some other fields here is with a snake case. But it contains data where you need it. Oops, you need it here. And we should be able to just generate that data or query from it. Hasura is very simple when it comes to that. If you have a database already, especially Postgres here, as we happen to have, and you can just drop in this command here. You can actually obtain that from their website, which is just connecting to my local database here we are using for the development thing. Once you've started that, it actually in the background spawns your Hasura terminal, how that's called, I think console. Console. Which we told it to be available on port 8080. So if you go to 8080, you can actually see here that it did a whole lot of view already. You have some nice visual. I'll just make that a bit bigger for everyone here to see. You have a nice UI already where you can do things. You can explore already. And how do you actually get the data in? It's by doing it here in the data. You can just go there and say, oh, here, look, we have tables that we are not tracking. So in preparation, I have already clicked here on the track button for the artists. And once you do that, you can already see here data to be previewed. You can modify the schema and edit it. So this here gave you a whole lot of things. So in the end, you can go back here to GraphQL and probably be able to click on here, and you have like already GraphQL API running. I mean, that's pretty awesome for you to get started. But if we come back, like, what have we actually learned right now? We have a GraphQL API, yes, but what do we know about the schema? What do we know about how it was generated, how it works? And do we really now feel like more confident in working with that technology for anything bigger? I would argue no. So there are other ways on how that can be done, and one of that is Prisma, like our host here, hi. And no, I was not forced to bring in Prisma. It just happened to be a very useful tool if you want to work against database data, and especially if you want to have a more precise look on what is going on. Prisma is different to Hasura here in that it doesn't just do a one command thing and you're done, but it actually generates you a schema or generates you files that you can then later on use to query your things while implementing the GraphQL schema by yourself. You can integrate that with other starters or tooling to take that part away from you, but they are not very opinionated around how the GraphQL or the data you expose via GraphQL will look like in the end. And then there are also tools that help you converting JSON shapes to a GraphQL SDL, because you might not just have the data readily available in a DB already. So if you happen to have just like a set of fixtures, you could use the, how's it called, GraphQL JSON server, also I think. But you have to have some very specific data shape that you have to put in there. And it's not really easy to do that sometimes, and other times it might be. So again, here it's more around, it's more around what you want to achieve with it and what exactly you want to learn. For some people, just like showing here, this is how a club timetable API would look like with GraphQL. Hasura definitely is enough, right? But if we want to extend it later on, to example, provide for an artist the next events and so on, we might need to customize something, and we would need to research again how to do that within that system. So you would learn Hasura, but you wouldn't necessarily learn GraphQL. Same could be argued with Prisma, but here it's actually that you don't learn Postgres or SQLite or whatever, but you learn like the Prisma way of how to generate your thing. How you will eventually end up consuming that in GraphQL will be like still up to you. So here, let's do the same thing with the Clubnacht Prisma client. And here we will actually finally run into that naming problem, and I can show you how that was actually solved. So here I should actually have, yes. So with a Prisma schema, I will just make that way more bigger for you. So the actual interesting part you provide by yourself is up here in a Prisma schema.prisma file. And we're basically just saying it, hey, go to the Postgres and generate us something for a JS client. Actually, it's a TypeScript client, but well, it's JavaScript at the end of the day. Then within our shell, we have run a command that then inflects the schema from the Postgres database and writes you those Prisma models. As you can see here already, that model is also lowercase, and it contains all the snake case formatting in here. But it actually already looks quite good. You get a good understanding of it, and it looks somewhat GraphQL-ish, right? And that's also because it actually is used for that later on. But you want to generate something that is more in the shape of how GraphQL naming works, which would be Pascal case, so an uppercase P here, an uppercase A here, and no underscore in between. Luckily, there is actually a tool that does that for you automatically. I run that over it, and then afterwards it looks like this. And that one here looks already quite understandable to me. And you know, I would feel confident in working with that somewhere within our code base. But mind here, this is like not GraphQL in itself right now here. This is just giving you a nice query layer on top of it. And for example, you could have as well have a corporate specific query layer. We had that at Contentful when we were building something. And then within our resolvers, we were just using our abstraction and could still reuse a good chunk of functionality later on in our GraphQL. Let's go back here. No. Where is it? Here. So after you have actually generated that client, that's what I was looking for. This is the only thing you get. You know, you get like this Prisma client, and then for every type, you get something generated here already. So you get actually type safety. And this one here will take away most of all the things you will ever want to do in the first iteration of a GraphQL API. And for people who are like very, very new to GraphQL, this one here is what we mean like with the resolver and the resolver function that also Dominic was talking about earlier. If we resolve, we have just like this function that will always be something like that. And in here, we can actually use that, that Prisma generated code. What we do by that is we are actually defining ourselves here how the data should be fetched later on. So if we combine that with this schema SDL we are going to generate, then we explicitly define what we want to expose. And I think that is like very, very crucial, and we will get to that later, that you're only doing in the beginning like what you need. And don't try to get like all of your domain into GraphQL at the same time. Try to adapt it in increased fashion and like step by step, and don't overwhelm yourself. In the end, it's always about that you feel comfortable and you feel like you've learned something, because in the end, what gives you the dopamine is like the learning effect. That's how our brain works, and you want to tease yourself a bit, right? We are all at home, you're all struggling. Tease yourself a bit, get some dopamine by just getting success in a new tool. As one might have recognized, in here we currently don't have any data GraphQL schema defined, and this is actually fine, because as I said, we had the REST API already beforehand. So what we can do is we can use another tool that gives us some rough overview of how that GraphQL schema should look like. And this is called transform.tools. It's a very handy website. I can only recommend that for you. Like whenever I need to transform data in between formats, I usually look at that first. And why can't I not move this here now? Well, that's... Oh, okay. Well, this here is the website. Here is my locally running API that is actually serving that. And if we look on a specific artist, we get events. This is basically reflecting right this page. And if we are just lazy and want to have something, we're not so familiar with the GraphQL syntax yet, give us something that we can use to create an event or an artist. Here for the event is actually nicer because it is nested with a playtime. We can just copy the JSON and drop that in here. Oops, like this. And what you will get out is already the GraphQL schema definition language that you can use afterwards with tools like Apollo or most of the other things that Vignesh was telling you already about. Here we have like slugs being string fields. You could now take that and change that to, example, be an ID field. So now you have very, very much fine-grained, specific, hands-on, dirty work with your data. And I think that's really good because that's where you feel comfortable. You know that data. You probably spot that here right away if you would be in that domain. And also the playtimes here, are like linking already to an array of artists. You get some nice naming actually inferred already. And you can take that and drop it somewhere here, and then later on use it in your types to actually combine that. So you might be wondering why we are only looking at queries here right now. And that is very easy to reason about, but you might still get that wrong. It's easy to, or it means easy, but it's feasible to later on add more things to your GraphQL schema when you proceed. So what you want to do is you want to provide the core use case that you will be doing with the GraphQL API, and that usually is consuming data. You already have existing data that we were inflecting on. So there's no necessity for you to write mutations, to put data into the system first, just so that you can use it. And actually, it would also be kind of you might be overthinking yourself. You might want to validate all the user input. You might want to do some roles or authentication or whatever. That's everything not that you should do in your very first attempt on a GraphQL API. You should just get you the best visible result output you get. And for that, you need a query type. Even if you would design a mutation first, you would still need a query, an object type later on to actually get something back from that mutation that you've sent. So when you send a mutation, you also specify a query afterwards that is executed to give you back to see what has changed or the success about it. So you would either way still need to write the query part. So in the beginning, bother with nothing else. The querying is the important one. If you then at some point feel keen and or curious about mutations, with Prisma, for example, you would be covered. The client would also provide you with methods there, or you can then step-by-step increase it. Also, very important for mutations, think about it in a way on what you want to instruct the system to do. Don't do it in an update X to Y kind of fashion. For, I don't know, shopping, I think Shopify has this real expressive add product to cart mutation. Then this is really clear on what you want to do. And in the beginning, you might not know all these use cases that your API will have because you're still thinking in REST terms or in even other terms like RPC or whatever. And you might just have those create, read, update, delete scenarios in your mind. And once you work with the data and you understand how they link to each other in the graph, you will think, or you will come up with more specific mutations you can do. That one here, I can really not stretch enough. Do only what is necessary. Yeah, the authentication I mentioned already. Query complexity also is a very good point, actually. Query complexity can like limit the amount of data you can pull out of your GraphQL API. And you might think, oh, like that's super important to show to my company, so I show we cannot be DDoSed or people cannot like abuse us to get like all the data. And yes, that's true, but those things and those scenarios can be implemented later and actually should be implemented later, because in the beginning, again, you're thinking REST terms, you might not know what is the most best query to get out of it. For example, for our Clubnacht homepage or an entry, in the beginning, you might just say, okay, like I just need an entry. Then, like an event, sorry. And then once you have an event, you will see, oh, I actually want like the one to the left and the one to the right as well. So you could provide like your previous event or next event also as fields on the GraphQL API. And that increases the complexity of the query you need to do. So design or limit afterwards, like protect your infrastructure, but design for the most clear and expressive query a user should be doing to get the data together. Also, you might be thinking, oh, I need to integrate that within our current infrastructure or something like that. I need to prove that, our HTTP server implementation that we have can do it. And we had the same thing in our company at Contentful, because we are using extensively Harpy for our services. And Harpy is a very good server in my point of view, but it is lacking a very good integration with GraphQL, or has been at least, because as Vignesh was mentioning with GraphQL Helix, you can actually get that with like mostly every HTTP server running. And that, if I would have known that beforehand, probably would have spared me a couple of hours, because I was trying to embed that and it didn't want to work properly. So in the end, we were then using Apollo server, which was just giving us a very good quick start so that we could just get it running. The thing here, to stretch again, it's transport independent. In the end, it's about the schema. You just make the schema accessible via the HTTP server, but as long as you're building and working on your GraphQL schema and resolvers and the implementation, it will work with all the servers you can come up with in the end. You don't need to do that right now. You're using Fastify or whatever, it doesn't matter, just like go for Express GraphQL, go for Apollo server, and have a look afterwards. Oops. Yeah, there are things you should care for in the beginning. And this one here is just like a personal experience. I don't know whether other people were actually struggling with it, but I found that to be like kind of a nice anecdote. And that is the pagination approach. So what I was doing in the very, very initial things when working with GraphQL was just like to have, like a collection, it's an array, right? So I think even on the GraphQL page, it is done like that you are showing like lists of things as like an array. And that can work, but for most of the real world use cases you have, you need to slice those collections into like subsets you can query, and you need to paginate around them. And this changes how your GraphQL schema will look like. If you don't care for that in the beginning, it is still possible to implement it, but type names change a lot, I figured, like, or at least if you want to keep them consistent and expressive, because now there's like one more nesting level in between that you need to go down, and that should just be accounted for. There are like two frequently used things, which is like offset-based pagination or cursor-based pagination, and it doesn't actually matter in the beginning which of both you choose, and you also don't need to implement it. Just get the nesting part right. Just make sure that if you are giving us, let's say here, an event, an artist has, no, the way around here. An artist has events. You could say, yeah, okay, that is just like event. That would mean you always get like all the events to it. That is not necessarily what you want. What you probably want is that you have events, which is like an artist event collection. And see, here like things start changing already. And then you have this type here, which has, depending on your implementation, and as I said, you can like just omit that for now, has, for example, skip or limit or has some kind of like a cursor when you click after. But those things are not important. Important is here that you decide whether you want to go with a relay-based approach or like a usual items-based approach. You can read up on that if you're curious. For now, I would just recommend you just put like here an items in, and then that items part is actually your event array. This way, you can later on decide what kind of pagination you want to have without changing all the things you have done so far, all the example queries you might have shared. And yeah, the implementation for that is very easy because at the end of the day, this is just an identity resolver here. The items just take the events that were passed and just pass them through. So you don't need to care for that in the beginning. But for me, it spared a couple of hours of work, I would say. Yeah, you might be wondering now, well, this looks like very manual what you're doing here, and why do we actually have all those cool tooling above that like bootstraps us all the project, generates everything if you're like in the end recommending us to go back and just do it manually? Well, this is not what I'm recommending for everyone, but just if you really want to deep dive into it, like if you really want to master the technique, you want to learn it, you want to validate a specific use case, then the resolver is your best friend. Like you can do a lot with it, and like also with the type definitions when you do them with like Nexus or GraphQL Compose, you can do so much with it. And in my point of view, you will only scratch the surface if you're using only generation tools. If you want to get the best out of it for your customer or for your project or whoever, you probably want to touch it to your needs. And for that, these resolvers here are very, very handy. And it would blow up the whole part of the talk, like how to use them properly. But don't be afraid to just have a couple of functions here and there everywhere that are like fetching your data and providing it to you. You will see eventually how to reuse them or how to structure them away for you. And there are probably also other great talks you can have or you can look at on how to do that. But mind that you will eventually need to write these. And there is like nothing wrong with it, and it's like not a code smell so that, I needed to implement like yet another resolver. If you are happening to derive the things from JSON like we did here, probably you don't need to do much with resolvers for your leaf fields. So like the scalar things you have, like start, end, and so on. Those are by default resolved by the name of the field. So if you provide the playtime's GraphQL type, a playtime object, then it will just work and resolve. It will take the ID property if you go to the ID field. And this helps you in the beginning, so you don't need to type them out expressive every time for every single field, but you can rely like on this default field resolver and only care for the juicy parts where you're like, going to the database, fetching your things. And this, my speaker notes are always going away when I flip the things. Yeah, sorry, I hope I have not been rushing too much through this. I wasn't actually sure how much time I just took here. I think it was a bit too much probably. And yeah, like shout out here to our organizers. Actually, with Prisma, it's a breeze to like just use the resolvers. Like just writing them is more or less like a couple lines of code every time, and you get the things out of the database. And I'm very looking forward to actually bring that to Clubnacht. Even though I need to do my own manual mapping to a database schema, I think that's definitely worth it. And yeah, with that, I will conclude and thank you for your time, and feel free to like ask the questions now. And the quiz questions are more or less the things I want you to take away from this. So I hope you enjoyed it, and let's have a chat.
Stefan, thank you so much for that. That was really insightful, and it was really interesting how I think you provided a strategy for anyone to get started with GraphQL today, with the data that they already have. So thank you for that. I think we had one question come in. I'll share my screen. Let's see. I'll bring up my screen. So this was a question that came from Bruce. It came a bit earlier, but perhaps you want to chime in on that, especially since you said, hey, you can just start off with just queries. You don't need to necessarily worry in the beginning about mutation. So having used it in a lot of systems, it's definitely great for read-heavy APIs. Do you see times where GraphQL shines for mutation operations compared to REST and the RPC?
I think RPC can be quite comparable to GraphQL mutations, because there you also have more, expressive.
Safety?
What?
Sorry.
So, no, so you on RPC you also have like very expressive kind of calls you do with like telling it explicitly what kind of action you want to do. And that is what I would say is comparable to both of them. So I wouldn't really say GraphQL shines there. When it comes to updating data compared to REST, I'm still on a split side. So that's why I'm also like probably encouraging people to go with query first, because it depends on what you're working with and the domain you're working in. Like for me, I'm usually thinking in terms of Contentful, because I've been there for like 4 years. So we there want to just like update an entry, for example. So usually you don't cross many boundaries between anything where it would justify having a graph. So, just like doing a REST put to like update it is like totally fine. While when you want to consume it, we're very data graph heavy. Like Contentful is like a graph of content. It's a content graph, really. So you can query and tap through it and like get multiple levels of linked things one together. But when you update them, you probably don't want to do that. So to cut it short, I don't think I have good things for where GraphQL shines for mutations, except for like the expressiveness for the UI developers, mostly, I would say, working against your API. So they can be like very expressive, or you can design very expressive things for them, for like the things, put something to a card, or like add a comment to a blog post, or whatever you can come up with in there. This is where it shines, but not necessarily for very generalized kind of update strategy.
Got it. Great. And someone asked about the link for the transformer tool, and I shared the link. It's transform.
Oh, thank you very much.
I just discovered it too, and I think it's wonderful.
It helps me so much all day. Whenever I need to do something, like, I have some data shape here and I want to get it somewhere else, I'm like, okay, let me first check if transform tools has it, and I don't need to do it, and otherwise I can still search on. And yeah, that's a good time saver.
Gotcha. Do you want to stay online for the second round of the quiz?
Yeah, sure. Like maybe just very quick to like this dgraph query question.
Yeah,
I think dgraph has a GraphQL-like kind of thing to query its data from the database. So I'm not aware that there is any other connectors that making it more spec compliant, but I also have not worked with dgraph in any like bigger scenario. I've literally just like set it up once and tried to play around. And I thought it would actually be supporting GraphQL and only supports a superset of it, like, the TypeScript, JavaScript kind of thing. So if you have more information around that, feel free to like reach out for more discussion. Whoever you are, anonymous, I would be curious on like what the actual problem is there.
Oh, great. We had Vignesh who just dropped a comment, and he's like, yeah, you have a dgraph GraphQL, which you can use. So I guess in this case, if you're implementing a GraphQL API that isn't the one that dgraph is exposing, you could make GraphQL calls to the dgraph.
Yes, exactly. But for that, you wouldn't need like a dgraph specific thing, actually. That's also a cool part here. You could use like anything that generates your GraphQL client, in terms of like client to communicate with that GraphQL server. So you could use like the thing I just showed was like, the Prisma, for example, no, Prisma probably not, but like using something that just like takes the GraphQL schema from dgraph and exposes it to you, and then you put those calls into the resolvers, or you think about some kind of like schema federation, stitching, whatever. But in general, I wouldn't recommend exposing a GraphQL interface of your database directly to the customer. I would like rather shield that, and even if you do like a request or two more than you would necessarily need to do, I think it's worth it for not exposing it to the outside world.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.